Jake Callahan lived alone, and that's just how he liked it. His ranch sat at the edge of a wide Arizona canyon, where the desert stretched for miles and the wind spoke louder than people. Years ago, a fire took everything from him: his wife, his son, his smile. Since then, he'd built a life of silence and routine. The land didn't ask questions, and neither did the cattle. Every day was the same. Up at sunrise, feed the horses, check the fences, ride the land, fix what needed fixing. At night, he'd sit on the porch with a cup of strong coffee, watching the sun bleed into the desert sky. He didn't go into town unless supplies were low, and even then, he kept his hat low and his voice quieter. But one August evening, something changed. Jake was riding the south ridge of his land when he heard something strange. It was a soft sound, like a whimper, almost too faint for human ears. At first, he thought it was an injured animal, but as he got closer, he realized it was a voice, a woman's voice. He slowed his horse and followed the sound into the canyon brush. There, under a mesquite tree, was a young woman. She was lying on her side, clutching her ankle. Her clothes were torn, and her face was dusty and scratched. Her long black hair was tangled with twigs and dry leaves. Her eyes, dark, wide, and scared, met his, and for a moment neither of them moved. Jake dismounted slowly, holding his hands out to show he meant no harm. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gravelly from disuse. The woman didn't answer. She looked like she was too weak to speak. Jake knelt beside her and offered his canteen. She hesitated, but then took a small sip. Her lips trembled as the water touched them. "Can you walk?" he asked. She tried to move, but winced and shook her head. Her ankle was badly swollen. Jake didn't ask any more questions. He lifted her gently into his arms and placed her on his horse, holding her steady as he walked alongside them back to his ranch. Back at the cabin, he laid her on the old couch and got to work. He wasn't a doctor, but he knew how to clean wounds and set sprains. He wrapped her ankle with a cloth and gave her some of the herbal salve he kept for the horses. She winced, but said nothing. For hours, she didn't speak a word. Jake didn't push her. He set a plate of beans and bread beside her and stepped outside to give her space. That night, she finally spoke. Her voice was soft, accented, and cautious. "My name is Naya," she said. Jake turned to face her from the porch, surprised but calm. "I'm Jake." She nodded, and silence returned. But something had changed. There was a thread between them now, thin but real. Over the next few days, Naya slowly healed. She stayed quiet, but Jake could tell she was watching everything. She was careful with his things, respectful of the space, and grateful in ways words didn't express. She cooked using wild herbs she found nearby, and Jake found himself eating better than he had in years. He learned that Naya was Apache, from a nearby village deep in the canyon. She didn't say much about what had happened, but Jake gathered enough to understand she'd been running. Some men had come to her village, strangers with rifles and bad intentions. She'd been taken, but escaped during the night, wandering through the desert for days before collapsing on Jake's land. Jake didn't press for more. He figured she'd tell him what she needed when she was ready. Still, something in him had shifted. Every time he looked at her, calmly grinding herbs in a bowl or limping out to the porch to sit in the golden light, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. One morning, Jake noticed boot tracks near the north fence, deep tracks, too clean to be his. He crouched and studied them, his instincts on high alert. These weren't rancher boots. They were heavier, like those worn by bounty hunters or worse. He didn't tell Naya, but that night he oiled his rifle and set it beside the door. The next day, while Naya was inside preparing something with mesquite pods and desert sage, Jake saddled his horse and rode the boundary of his land. He found more tracks, this time leading toward the canyon. Someone was definitely looking for something. Or someone. When he returned, Naya was sitting on the porch with a quiet look on her face. She glanced at the rifle. "You saw them," she said. Jake nodded. "They close?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she looked out over the desert, her eyes scanning the distant rocks. "They will come," she said quietly. "They always do." Jake felt a cold chill run through him. He'd lived through loss and pain, but this felt different. He wasn't just protecting his land anymore. He was protecting someone who mattered. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat on the porch, watching the stars and the dark desert. Every sound made his hand twitch toward the rifle. At some point, Naya came out with a blanket and sat beside him. She didn't say anything, just wrapped the blanket around both of them and leaned slightly against his shoulder. For a man who had lived in silence for so long, her touch was louder than thunder. And in that moment, Jake Callahan realized something he hadn't wanted to admit. He was falling for her. But he also knew something else. The desert never gave without taking, and he feared that the price for saving Naya might be his heart. The morning came cold and heavy. The desert sun was slow to rise, as if even it feared what the day might bring. Jake Callahan stood at the edge of his porch, scanning the horizon. He hadn't slept. His rifle was loaded and his horse saddled. Something deep inside him told him this was the day the men hunting Naya would arrive. Behind him, the door creaked open. Naya stepped out, wrapped in a faded blanket. Her ankle was still swollen, but she moved with quiet strength. Her eyes met his. She could feel it too. "I can go," she said softly. "If I leave, they won't hurt you." Jake turned toward her, his jaw tightening. "This is my land," he said. "They come here, they answer to me. But I brought danger to your home." "You brought life back to it," he replied. For a long moment, they just stood there, the silence between them thick with everything they couldn't say. Then Jake gently touched her hand. "I've already lost everything once. I'm not losing you too." Just before noon, they came. 4 riders. Dusty coats, wide-brimmed hats pulled low, guns at their sides, eyes hard.